Hi, Maria.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. So, I think everybody sort of knows just who's logging in from the emails and the descriptions for today's show. But for people who might be logging in later on YouTube or another time, just a brief introduction. Maria is the author of Tarot for the Hard Work, an archetypal journey to confront racism, and more importantly, or as importantly, inspire collective healing. I think that's a really important part of that subtitle. Um, and I think it's one of the most important books to come out, certainly in the last year, maybe in the last 5 or 10 years on tarot. And it's a, a beautiful workbook, which I think is really a nice style to work in because it engages people uh, actively in the work, rather than just being didactic and or instructive. Um, so it's a participatory journey uh, in that context, and as well, Maria incorporates her unique and beautiful insight into the major arcana of the tarot. Um, so with that introduction to Maria, I want to start pulling some cards so that we can see what the cards want us to talk about. And today I am working. Sorry, today I'm working with the Wiser Tarot, which is a tarot that I really like. It is a reimagined version of the Rider Waite Smith deck with a purposeful intent to be more inclusionary, on the 65th anniversary of the Wiser uh, Books publishing house, which also happens to be the publisher of Maria's book, which is not why I chose the deck. But um, okay, let's see. What's the first card? I've been pulling this card a lot lately. So we have the Knight of Cups. Um, the Knight of Cups. I've been pulling a lot of court cards lately. A lot of court cards. It's really interesting. Um, and I know the court cards are troubling for a lot of people. I don't know what your. I'd love to hear what your take is on court cards, Maria. The Knight of Cups is embodies um, the spirit of the elements of air and water. So it's like the intellect of emotion, which is almost contradictory. But I think you sort of see it in this character who's got like the wings of Mercury on his helmet, and but that he's not going very fast, but going deliberately, um, in one direction. And so I guess my question then to you, Maria, is your approach in doing this work and writing this book, um, is both intellectual and emotional and steady. Can you talk a little bit about how the Knight of Cups maybe incorporates or encapsulates what your journey was in writing this book? Does it?
Yeah, I never put those attached that archetype to my description of my process in writing the book, but I do see the Knight of Cups showing up in so much as when I see the Knight of Cups, sometimes it shows up in a way in which the figure, whether it's the querent or the person we're talking about in a reading, has this swelling amount of passion and and emotionally charged drive to move forward to do the thing. Their mind and their heart are connected in such a really deep way that it shows up as, an energetic pursuit forward. And so, yeah, I guess that does kind of describe how I was in writing the book. It was because of the subject matter, it wasn't just necessarily an intellectual pursuit. I definitely had to um, work through my own emotions in the book. In the introduction, I say, like, I'm not writing this book to you. I'm doing these activities alongside with you, and the work of confronting racism, in the search for collective healing. It is difficult to do that work without any ounce of emotion. And
Mm,
it's difficult to be the Knight of Cups without any emotion. And so writing the book was, it was, there was a lot of research involved, there was a lot of thought involved, but it was also a very emotional journey for me in terms of confronting my own internalized racism and confronting how I can better show up, in the world, not just for like, the world overall, but how I show up in my close connections, and how I decide to become like an active bystander rather than a passive bystander. And so there were a lot of times when writing this book, I thought about times where I could have shown up better, more visibly or more audibly, for people, at different intersections. And so I had to do the work of confronting, the emotional work of regret and, oh, I wish I would have done this. Had I known this or thought about it this way, I would have, stood up for this person, in a different way than I did. And so it was definitely an emotional journey writing the book, but I think that, that's why the book is what it is. It's not just me telling you what to do. It's me also putting myself in the reader's shoes and trying to understand how I can affect change in my everyday life, rather than, and with the Knight, we do have the risk of burnout because we have so much passion with the Knight of Cups, but, um, in a more upright way, the Knight maintains their passion, and they maintain their speed, their steadiness in a sustainable way. And so I definitely had emotional moments, but I didn't let that, get in the way of writing the book, because I think a lot of times with anti-racism work, we get overwhelmed and we think, oh, I did this thing wrong. My ego is shot, and this isn't for me. I'm not the right person to do this work. But this work involves a lot of, you know, messing up, and the will to keep on going. And the
well,
Knight
that's
keeps
very
on
human.
going. Right, right. It's the nature of being human. And if we all gave up every time we, you know, did a racially insensitive thing, then no one would be doing anything.
One of the things that I really like about this card, is the steadiness of the Knight approaching the river, approaching the water, even though there's a mountain on the other side of it. So there's this sense of moving from a place of calm, a plain, a meadow, through a cleansing uh, body of water into a more difficult terrain, which is a lot of what your book or what you're asking people to do in your book.
Yes, it definitely felt like a courageous act to be so visible about this topic,
Mm.
particularly in a space. I know there's a lot of, you know, tarot and politics shouldn't exist together, like they should be separate. But in reality, tarot reflects the entirety of our life experiences. And so I could have hesitated, but I think because I have this cups passion about what I'm writing about, I think that's the anchor that I held on to while writing the book. And despite knowing that, there may be mountains to cross later, this stream might, it seems pretty calm, but who knows what could happen.
Mm.
I just knew that like I had this, intellectual and emotional, devotion for the topic that I was writing about, and that I'm moving forward regardless. And I think the Knight of Cups is a really brave, is a really brave archetype, and I don't know if I would have thought of myself as brave while writing this book, but looking back, to traverse into unknown, unfamiliar territory is a courageous act in its own. So I think I see parts of the Knight of Cups embodied in this person that I'm remembering I was when I wrote the book.
Mm, that's that's really, I mean, yes, it takes a lot of courage. I think it takes a lot of courage to write about anything and to put yourself out there in the public in any way. But, also with the work that you're writing about, it takes that level of courage up to another echelon. Let's see what the next card brings us. And it brings us another court card. And it brings us the Page of Pentacles. I love the pages of all of the court cards. I love the pages because they're like children, right? They're that innocent energy that mirrors the Fool card, but is sort of attached to the element that they represent. And here we're talking about, the material world and being a part of that idealism, the idealism of the material world. And I think that for today, pulling this card for you, the Page of Pentacles, that idealism for the material world is really relevant again to the topic of the work that you're doing, because one of the things that you say in the book is you have to believe in the work to be able to do the work. You have to believe that there's a future. Otherwise, what's the point? Can you talk a little bit about that?
For sure, definitely. I I I believe that wholeheartedly. Like, you have to believe that a more ideal future can exist, because otherwise, like, you might not do the work at all, you might deprioritize it. We have to believe um, that a more equitable future, a more empathetic future exists, and that we can take part in that. And one thing that I love about the pages are is this sort of student curiosity, um, creative energy that in the Page of Pentacles shows up in, like, I think, student of the world. And
Mm,
it's that sort of energy that I want anyone picking up this book to bring to their work. Nobody is, the archetypal best, never messes up activist. The page is always willing. The page lives in the world, but they learn as they are going through it. They remain curious. They remain um, open. And the Page of Pentacles, in relation to anti-racism work, I think connects with, yesterday I was speaking with someone about what would be the very first thing that I would tell somebody to do when starting anti-racism work is it. And I thought, well, it all starts with noticing. And
mm,
the page, in this sort of wide-eyed, childlike wonder state, they are particularly open to um, noticing the world that they live in, the physical material world that they live in. And when we're at the Pentacles, we're thinking about, often we're thinking about our mundane everyday life. And that's kind of what I want people to focus on when they read the book and work through the activities, is not just how, not just, I don't want them to necessarily seek out these, like, large moments where they can, like, really create these huge, you know, this huge impact. The work is really, the world we create and the world that we are creating is going to take lots and lots of little everyday actions, and that takes being aware of your surroundings. And if you have to approach everyday life, mundane life, with a new sort of, like, with a broader lens, then that's going to support your journey because if you can, we definitely can work on autopilot, but I don't think there's any situation in life in which there isn't a learning opportunity. And so if we approach this work as students rather than with the expectation that we have to become anti-racism experts, then we become more open to the tiny ways that we can affect change, how you just whether it's the words you choose or the people you hire, so on and so forth. I think the change really is in everyday life, and it starts with noticing.
I love that. And also, the pages, they never get tired of being a part of
Yes.
what they're learning, or they are always seeing things fresh and with excitement, which I think is beautiful. And I love the way that you express that. And let's see, are we going to pull another court card? Yes.
Oh my goodness.
The Queen of Cups. So now we're progressing from
Oh.
Knight to Queen. Um, I love the Queen of Cups. She's so regal and elegant, and yet there's this sense in the Queen of Cups of an inward looking emotion. I mean, she is a master of compassion and hope and expression of uh, treatment towards others. And she's holding that crazy looking cup, which I've always thought looked a little bit like a robot with crab claw hands. And I always thought of sort of as a child, like this is her child. Um, and but she's sitting there surrounded by all of this water in a very empress like uh, correlation. I've always thought of her connected, or all of the queens really, with the empress in a lot of ways. um, you talked about the knight energy, and also, the queen of cups is uh, the water of water. So it's the ultimate master of emotion, of compassion, of feeling. Um, and it compels me to ask you, now that the book is out there in the world, now that you've been out there talking to people, getting feedback, hopefully seeing people start to change and do the work, how does that make you feel looking at this baby that you've put out into the world?
Yes. Oh, what a wonderful question. I wrote this book. I often describe it as my biggest spell because I think everything we do somehow ripples out into the world, whether we recognize it or not, just by nature of cause and effect on a very physical level, and then so on and so forth. And so I feel like that was the spirit in which I wrote this book. And that is what I am like. I feel like I am seeing the effects of the spell out in the world. There are lots of book clubs going on that have read this book, are reading this book, are discussing, and people are planning action groups, are getting in groups and planning actions, going, chapter by chapter. And I think that if everyone picked up this book and they just did one activity, one out of the hundreds of activities, then like I'm happy. And so to hear all of the positive feedback and to see people showing me ways that they've changed or ways that they are changing the way they show up in their lives or um, projects and initiatives that they've started in their communities as a result of being inspired by something they read in this book, that feels really good. And I think that I've written this book in such an evergreen way, and that like you can pick this book up in 10 years and you can there you can be inspired to do something then. It's not just a very like 2024 book. It's, there is a lot of potential for change to happen. And I really tried to make it clear in the book that this is work that anyone can do no matter what your station in life is.
And when you were saying that, not just a 2024 book, in my head, I thought, I'm going to respond with, hopefully it's a forever book. And then I'm like, no, I don't want it to be a forever book. I want your book to not be relevant someday. That's a terrible thing,
Yes.
maybe, to say to many authors.
No, I
But for
agree.
your work, I think it would be nice. But let's hope.
I think it would be nice if like years into the future people look at the book and they're like, "Oh, we've moved past this. We don't,
Yeah,
this is 101 stuff." So
yeah.
I'm happy to be part of like some people's like jumping off points, but I hope that, there's a future in which some of the things I'm suggesting become obsolete because we have healed those things.
I just want to mention, because somebody in the chat asked about the deck, so I'll mention again. I'm pulling from the Wiser Tarot deck. Letty, I don't know if you're able to, but maybe you can put a link to the deck in the chat if you have a moment, while I pull another card and see. Did not pull a court card this time.
Wow.
Wow. Um, but I did pull a major, and I pulled the Chariot, which is always kind of a bittersweet card for me, because I feel like there's all of this energy and all of this potential and all of this knowledge and power and motivation ready to go, and yet not moving. It's a stalled, it's a stalled, uh, in many ways, it's a stalled archetype. You've got this, in this deck, the sphinxes, which are, our yin and our yang, our balance. We're talking about looking for balance, but they're facing different directions. They're not moving. We're just sitting there. We're ready to go. And I think for the work that you're doing, the relevance is that as a culture, as a global culture, certainly as an American culture, North American culture, we're on the precipice. We're ready to get going. We need motivation to get up and start moving, though. Do you? I guess I'd love to have your perspective on that. Do you feel like we're ready to move? Do you think we're moving? Do you think that the work that you're doing can motivate those sphinxes to get up and walk in the same direction and not compete with each other? And certainly that's the goal.
Yeah, I think we're ready to move. I think despite what mass media will tell you, a lot of us are already moving. There is already, there are so many examples of great changes that are being made. And if that is difficult for you to perceive, like I not you, but anyone listening, like I trust me, like people are doing great things out in this world. So we are already moving. And with the chariot in the chapter around the chariot in the book, I think it really what I write about really connects to this point of like stasis that you mentioned about the chariot. And I think one place where our work, our motivation gets blocked is in sort of figuring out like, all right, I'm in this chariot. I've got these tools. Like, what do I do? Where do I go? And I use the major arcana archetypes as like, it's very difficult to think of oneself as like an activist, for me at least. But can I envision what the high priestess as an activist would do. Like, yeah,
Hmm.
I can pretend to be the high priestess today. And so the chariot, I write about, picking a lane. There are so many different ways that you can show up for in dismantling structural racism in the world. So many ways. And if you look at that entire landscape, that map, it can be overwhelming. And with the chariot, I tell readers, just pick a lane. If you're a teacher, how can you affect positive change in that lane of your life? If are a community gathering, how can you make your community organizer, how can you make your gatherings more inclusive? Like, where are you already at, and where can you keep going? Because it's not necessarily that the chariot
Without
is starting at
reinventing the
ground
wheel.
zero. Exactly, right. Like the chariot, is not card one. We've gone through this line of the personal ego. We've done the inner work. And when we're at the chariot, we've done, hopefully done enough work to feel the authority to choose where to go next. And even though the chariot in this image is at stasis, I don't think that there's anything wrong with pausing instead of getting overwhelmed with all that one could do. I think there's
Hmm.
value in just stopping to pause, like to evaluate, where have I been? Where do I want to go? Where am I already? And what is the, not necessarily easiest route to take, but what is the route to take in which I can actually impact change? If you like, I, you know, I might want to, confront racism in academia. And yes, that is something I care about, but currently I'm not in that world. And,
Hmm.
I could work toward being in that world, but like I can't, the work is so urgent that I can't just wait until I am, in some other place in life. Like, who am I now, and what can I do with who I am? Because I know who I am. I've been through this first line of the personal ego of the Major Arcana. I have some semblance of where I am and who I am in relation to the world around me. And as the chariot dives into the second row, the chariot is ready to dive in deeper. And so, yeah, chariot's really like pause, pick a lane, and don't get overwhelmed, because there are so many that it will take so many different roads to liberation.
I, I love that chapter, and I love that idea of picking a lane. And I don't know if you feel the same way or if other people make this correspondence, but when I see the Four of Swords, it's the charioteer who is lying there, who is pausing. And so
Mm.
to talk about pausing um, makes a lot of sense before you turn the ignition in your car and get going, figure out where you're going. And when you get on the freeway, rather you're going to get where you're going as fast or faster if you just stay in your lane rather than zip all through traffic like a mad person. And and that makes a lot of sense. Something that you said, I'm always looking for different correspondences between the cards. I love
I
seeing
love it.
that. Um, and when you talk about picking a lane, I see the Two of Swords as well. I see
Mm.
sitting there, pausing before you make a decision, um, and moving forward. So I think that that's
I
really
love that.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree.
okay. Let's see. What do we have now?
This is fun. I'm enjoying this.
I knew I was going to pull this card for you today. I don't know how, I don't know why, but I knew I was going to pull. I didn't know I was going to pull all the other courts, but I knew I was going to pull this one, the Queen of Swords.
That is the card I had with me on my desk the entire book writing journey. That
Really?
was when, like, when thinking of like choosing a lane, like who am I going to be in this journey, I envision myself as the Queen of Swords throughout the entire, from inception to publication.
Talk about that. I want to hear about that.
I I just love how much I think we live in a world that is in which it is very easy to lose confidence in your sense of voice. There are so many competing messages out there, and so many so many things that are pulling for our attention and our energy, and we can get overwhelmed. Like, of course, so many of us have ADHD. Like, look at the world we're living in. And the Queen of Swords, however, can focus. And I was like, okay, that's
Mm,
who I want to be. This archetype, they can focus their thoughts, um, and their communication, and align those in ways that are very intentional. And they can do that because they're confident enough to do that. They know that they have something to say, and they are going, like, this is maybe not, the most fast moving of cards, but the queen is deliberate. They are intentional in their language. They understand, as the queen, that their words and their communication in general has an impact on the broader world. Like, the queens, I think, oftentimes are the full embodiment of a suit, when the king is often more about like this, like embodying the suit and sharing and dispersing it. The queen is like this, the Queen of Swords is like this encapsulation of an archetype that is confident enough to bring whatever's in their mind out into the world. They, in this depiction, they have their hand outstretched, and I think that's a slight detail, but I think it's a meaningful detail, because we might be able to zoom out of this image and see who this figure is, like, gesturing
motioning.
toward,
Yeah.
motioning toward, and that speaks to inward out, in the mind and out into the world. And so I wanted to approach this project with confidence in my voice, but also clarity. We've got the sword, so like, I was tried to be very discerning about, I can't fit everything into this book, but I definitely practice a lot of thoughtful discernment, and the Queen of Swords is, I think in my everyday life, like in who I am, I'm definitely the Queen of Wands. But when I sit down and write, I'm full Queen of Swords energy. And
I
I am just like, wow, of course you pulled this card.
I knew it. I don't know how, but I knew. Like for days, I've been like playing with decks, and you know, sort of. I'm also doing an event this afternoon, so I've been like practicing for that too. But preparing for this and that, and the whole time I'm like, I know I'm going to pull the Queen of Swords for her. It's just crazy. But also, I want to point out, in the Queen of Swords, this sword, which is, I always think of a pen, being a sword. A pen is a sword, and
Absolutely.
it's a way of taking our thoughts and communicating them to others through language. But this sword, this pen that the queen is holding, is pointing straight up towards source, towards the divine, and channeling the divine down through her intellect and her emotion and outward into the world in many ways, like the Hierophant does. Um, and you see the wind in the trees, the message being carried through communication, through language. She's such an intellectual character, but or archetype, but also embodies feeling. And what I think is really interesting is, in pulling first the Knight of Cups, we've got the air of water, and with the queen, we've got the water of air. So you've got both of those things working here
Wow.
in this reading. Thank you for talking a little bit about that. That's amazing that you had that. Oh, and also the bird flying above her crown,
Mm,
you know, is again birds being messengers and carrying uh,
messengers.
that that and her crown is butterflies. There's so much beautiful imagery in that card. I really, really love it. And of course, you are the Queen of Swords and carried it on your desk the whole time you were writing. And you, I mean, I've only known you for what, a few weeks, and we've had a few uh, chances to get together and chat and talk about the book and talk about many other things. But I see such strength in you, such inner strength. It makes sense to pull this card as well. And it takes a strong person to be able not only to do the work that you talk about in the book, um, but to bring that message through and present it to the world. Um, can you talk a little bit about, do you feel, a couple of things I want to ask with this card. Do you feel that strength? Did you have to draw upon that? Where did you find the strength to write this book? And then can you talk a little bit about um, the archetype, because your book uses the archetypes. So can you talk a little bit about using this archetype to fight racism as well?
Yeah. So the first part of
And
that,
plus you have a
I
cat, so
yeah.
sorry, it's a cat. So
Oh, yes. He has shown up a few times, but he doesn't want to be in the clear view. Maybe he'll come back. But this is a question I have not thought about. Where did I don't know. I felt more like a channel, a vessel in writing
hmm.
this book. I had so many downloads and like my energy centers and channels were very clear. And so I'm not sure if I had to do anything to feel strong enough to write this book, but also I'm not sure if I perceived myself as the strength archetype um, at any point in writing this book. A lot of it was just very like,
Matter of fact.
I wouldn't. It felt very matter of fact. I feel a lot. One thing about me, I've always felt, ever since I was a child, I've always felt deep conviction in my beliefs. And perhaps the strength I found to write the book is found somewhere in my conviction and belief in a more ideal future. And perhaps what's strong, maybe I am strong, but perhaps what the strength card is pointing to for me is how strongly I believe in the possibility of a more equitable future. And I think in terms of like the strength card connecting to anti-racism work, strength is like everyone has their like cards that they're just like, I they have like a more difficult relationship with, and I don't have a difficult relationship with the strength card,
Hmm.
but it doesn't show up in my readings very often for myself, or just in general throughout life.
Can I
But
propose something?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, knowing your story and how you came about writing the blog that became the book, um, and this card, there's a lot of passion in this card, those roses around the figure indicate passion and purity in the same way as the magician. I feel like there's a lot of correspondence between strength and the magician with that, white robe and the purity and the lemniscate above her head. Like the magician, there's this power of drawing from taking something that is a ferocious beast and taming it, but that ferocious beast is ourselves. And
Yes.
so there's
Yeah.
something to be said for the strength of rage at injustice. And I think when you told me the story of how this sort of began in 2016 and realizing that there was more under the surface in our culture that was percolating boldly to the top in very ugly and unpleasant ways. I think it takes a lot of strength to be able to confront that. So if you don't see yourself in that archetype, I absolutely see you in that archetype, or that archetype in you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think deep down I believe it. Writing this felt less like I have to remind myself to be strong, and more so like just being driven by the strength of that passionate rage toward injustice. Like maybe that's how the strength archetype shows up in how I approach this book. Very strong convictions, very strong rage, and very strong passion and love for people. Like I love being human. I love being here on this planet. I see the good in my life, and I want other people to have that experience as well. And I believe I believe so strongly that life can be a wonderful thing to experience. And because I believe that so much, I felt like what I was writing, like I had to write this book. It didn't feel like, oh, one day when I'm strong enough, I will write this book. It's just like I have to, because I have all of these strong feelings. So you're helping me connect the dots. And 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 you speak to like this. You asked about this archetype um in our anti-oppression work, and I think that there's something to be said about pulling upon the strength of your strong feelings. If you if you look at the world we live in and you don't have strong feelings um, about wanting to make the world a more equitable place, then perhaps that's something to learn from. Perhaps you need to get back to that Page of Pentacles energy of like broadening your lens and understanding that there are so many different types of life experiences people are having, and that you may have strong connections, you may have strong benefits from your privilege, that you might be able to draw upon to help elevate other people in this world. So I think strength really does, the first word that comes in mind as a correlation is passion. And passion can be a very, very strong ingredient in whatever we do.
Yes, indeed. I want to make sure that we have time for people to ask questions and for you to answer them as well. So I want to see if anybody has any questions. If you do, please feel free. I'm just going to look at the chat and see if anybody's put anything there already. Either put it in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself and speak up if you have any questions for Maria. Anybody? Don't be shy.
I have a question.
Yes.
So this has just been awesome. First of all, thank you so much, James, for doing this. My question is, so I'm a visual artist and I do collage work. How do you bring diversity into that space that is in how do you take down racism in that space? It's hard when you're collecting that type of material. I have a bunch of old books from like the 90s, and trying to pick and choose images. So I think my question is, how can I, as an artist, do anti-racism work that makes an impact through my work that isn't fetishizing anyone or portrays anyone in a, you know, a culturally insensitive light? So yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, I think that's a
question.
really great question. Yeah, thank you for asking. My first thought is to consider the sources from which you are pulling these images. I think if, you know, like, yes, we can, like, we might have like old magazines and such that were, created by perhaps more homogenous organizations. And so I think that there's something to be said about like, what if you pulled from old books or magazines that were written by or created by and intended to serve a different audiences. So perhaps that, means looking at, magazines that are written by and geared toward Asian Americans, for example. And I think pulling from like those like different kinds of sources can help you feel a little bit more confident in that you're not necessarily fetishizing different people in your art, because you're pulling from sources that like their intention was not to fetishize this person, that they're being that the way that they are being depicted is in a racially sensitive light. And so if you pull a lot of your images from, let's say, all like predominantly white magazines, you might find examples of less than thoughtful depictions of people of color. But if you diversify your sources, you can be sure to like feel a little bit more like I know, like I get the sense that like your desire is not to fetishize anybody or to to just include people of color just so you can check the mark. And so I think it just comes down to like diversifying your sources and just making sure you're pulling from, different cultural backgrounds. And so you have a wider array of images to choose from. So you're not just like, oh, there's this one Black person in this article
Good
or in this
housekeeping
newspaper clipping. Yeah, so I have
from
to use this person. It's
1956.
like, no, like let's get let's broaden our sources, and perhaps that will help you feel a little bit more comfortable in making sure you're not tokenizing anyone.
And I think also, in addition to what you were saying, Maria, of I like when you're talking, I'm thinking of American magazines because I'm an American from an older era. Because Miriam, you were talking about pulling from magazines from the 90s or sources from the 90s or maybe earlier even, but potentially looking outside of our culture and to the source culture. For example, looking at newspapers and magazines that are local, because we have everything on the internet now, right? Or so many things that are local to countries in Asia or cultures in Asia and Africa, India. That might be another source that would be directed towards that audience in a culturally relevant way rather than an outsider looking at that culture way and portraying them way. Does that help you?
Yeah, that helps me a lot. I think I've been lucky. I've been able to find a lot of more like documentary sources. So they kind of have this, they just kind of captured the moment. But I think that gives me confidence when I find an image that I feel like I have this image of these two boys from India, and you can just see their friendship. Like it's not fetishized, it's just, they're just friends. Like, and so trying to find those images within, and then also that was really helpful suggesting looking up sources. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank
Cool.
you.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Thank you. Maria, what was your process in writing the book? Did you start with the topic and then pull cards about that? Did you start with the cards and follow their lead? Or how did that process evolve for you?
Yeah. I am going to put a container around this in terms of like how my process was when I decided that this was going to be a book.
Okay.
I knew that I wanted to work with the Major Arcana, and the way I work is, I get pen and paper and I just like brain dump everything I could think of. And one thing that was really important for me was if I'm writing a workbook, I need, at least I know for me, I need structure and clarity and to understand what to expect coming up. And so I created the structure first. I knew I wanted to I wanted this book to teach about tarot and teach about anti-racism and teach about the combination of those two. And so I created the structures. Every chapter has, this, and this section. And then I really sat with the cards a lot. I read through lots of my notes. I've been reading tarot for over 20 years, so I've got a lot of different sources to pull from, and whether that's from my experience with clients or from reading books or having conversations with other great tarot readers. And so a lot of this was just sort of like, okay, I have the structure, and then I just sort of pulled from all sorts of different sources and plugged them into the different sections. And then my work in like actually writing the book, like I made sure I had everything I wanted to include in the book. And then writing the book was basically figuring out how to string all of these themes together in a way that would paint a cohesive picture of each major arcana archetype that showed each one in as many dimensions as I could. I didn't want, the Fool always means this. And so this is what we're always going to talk about. I wanted to bring, the Fool also looks like this and this and this. And that way, I think in terms of painting these archetypes as these very human and multidimensional characters, we find it easier to find ourselves in these archetypes because we are not, none of us is a monolith, and nobody wants to be treated like a monolith. And so in creating texture for these characters by pulling from all of these different sources and bringing together all of these ideas that might seem disparate when looked at without like a common unifying thread, I feel like I was able to accomplish my goal of creating depth in these archetypes in ways that people can really relate to. And so my goal, partially was, earlier I said I think sometimes like we want to show up in the world, but we don't know how. But we can always dress for the job that we want. Like I might not know how to, I don't know, create this community organizing fundraiser thing, but what if the judgment archetype was going to do this? What would they do? And how am I like the judgment archetype? And how can I channel this inspiration and embody those characteristics in order to step into a next new level of bravery, in order to stretch my wings, and to show up differently in the world, because I know I have so many different facets of myself that I can offer, and I'm not just one thing at any one time.
Thank you. That was inspirational.
And Maria, I think that
Thank you for asking.
I don't think you need to
Yes.
put a container around that at all.
Oh, okay. I was like, I could talk about this all day, but like, how do I do this in the most succinct way possible? So thank you for letting me meander for a bit.
No, that was good. It was I thought it was quite informative, and again, it's inspirational. Thank you.
Thank you.
And one of the things I wanted to mention, I mean, I'm sure that other people have had this insight as well. But one of the things that you brought me into is that envisioning the archetype and then stepping into the archetype. So one of the things that I've learned throughout my journey in tarot, and one of the things that Letty, our host today, is so brilliant at doing, and other teachers of mine, is having conversations between the cards, the characters in the cards, which I love to do.
Yes.
Or stepping into the scene and evaluating it from inside the card, but stepping into the archetype itself and envisioning how would the archetype do it, and if I'm going to take on the characteristics of that archetype and approach it in that way. I think that that's just a really brilliant insight. And one of the things that you add, I want to mention, we've got to wrap it up. But one of the things that Maria does in the book, in the different things she's talking about, building a structure, is giving us a toolkit for doing the work to confront racism, for having the strength and the tools that we need to be able to do the work, and to do it in such a way that it doesn't overwhelm us from the outset or through the work itself and become overburdened. So I highly encourage you to pick up the book, Tarot for the Hard Work. It's available pretty much everywhere, all major booksellers, and any good tarot shop, and dive in and learn about yourself and what you can do to make the world a better place. And Maria, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about this and letting me pull cards for you. I feel so privileged.
Thank you. You are one of my favorite people in my tarot community. And so I am so grateful that we've had this time together. And I'm so grateful for everyone who showed up, everyone who's listening to the recording. It is my honor to cross paths with you in this lifetime. And if anyone, I'm sure there will be details shared, but like, if you want to reach out to me and talk about anything, my door is open. And thank you again, James and Letty, for allowing this time to happen. I am so grateful, and I love the idea of pulling cards to guide a conversation. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Letty. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And we'll see you at the next Tarot Talk Show. Bye-bye.
Bye.